Okay, so starting with the repeated references to sterility and destruction establish an apocalyptic alternative which has an immediate relevance in the era of the Cold War. So in the period of the Cold War, where there was a nuclear arms race, obviously between the USSR, Russia, and United States, there was a big fear that it would actually turn into nuclear war. And as a result of the nuclear war, there would be a nuclear winter, or a period of time where people would be very much affected by the radiation that was a result of the atomic weapons. And of course, we know that one of the results can be difficulties with childbirth and things like that. So this apocalyptic sense that Albee is echoing in his text, which was written around the time of the Cold War, plays into his audience's current fears of sterility, of the society gone wrong. Virginia Woolf, as Mark Goldman has pointed out, was always interested in truth-tellers, such as Defoe, who can make us believe in a world of facts. She did not, however, accept what Sartre has called inert reality. To her, the reality which must always be courageously faced was life itself, and as such it changed with the generations. To Albee, the reality of the 20th century is a grim one. The homosexual overtones which some critics have noted in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and especially in his later plays, Tiny Alice and Malcolm, are equally an image of an age in which science offers the threat of emasculation, a threat which, as Eric Brentley has pointed out, has also informed Shakespeare's tragedies. It is with the curse of childlessness that Lear damns Goneril, with the preparedness to destroy any child of her own that Lady Macbeth reveals her evil. So in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, it is the fear of impotence, with its implications of a terminal generation, that underlines the whole action. If impotence is an aspect of homosexuality, how much more so is it the inevitable consequence of bland illusion in a threatened new Carthage? So the point to take out of this paragraph is again that continuation of the motif of not being able to make children. So last lesson, we talked about how this aspect of not being able to make children could become from a society gone sterile. Now, in this next paragraph, they're looking at another reason why children may not be being created is because of homosexuality. Now, apparently, according to this paragraph, Albee liked to entertain homosexual ideas in some of his later plays and also in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. However, the paragraph didn't actually present us with any evidence of that. But he suggests here that homosexuality is echoed through any challenge to one's masculinity. For example, we can see particularly in this text that a lot of the times having a woman fight with a man is really a direct challenge to his masculine nature. You know, the woman is meant to play second fiddle. She's meant to come second and not challenge the man. In many ways, Martha tries to take away George's masculinity by, again, not assigning him that role of man in her life and also not respecting his position and sort of fighting with him. So, him being emasculated, him not being a man, again relates to this notion of impotence. Impotence is when you cannot actually create children. So, for example, sometimes when men have a low sperm count or something like that, or they're impotent, they feel like they're not a real man. They feel like they're sort of less of a man. So this notion of the absence of children could be related to this notion of impotence, which is related to the way that the male characters in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf are emasculated by the female characters, for example, George by Martha. So that's a point that you can take out of that paragraph. The examples of homosexuality specifically, I'm not sure. I didn't see any particular example referenced in that paragraph. So I would just focus in my notes about the fact that George is an example of a man who's being emasculated by the woman in his life, and that can be echoed with ideas of impotence and the lack of children. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is in essence a modern secular morality play. The gospel which it teaches, as we have seen, is the primacy of human contact based on an acceptance of reality. To Albee, this is essentially a Christian objective both in the zoo story and in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, in which a son is sacrificed for redemption. Indeed, these two plays, together with the later Tiny Alice, serve to create a myth for this secular religion, which is not so far removed from the liberal humanism of Paul Tillich. Jack Gelber, in The Connection, has one of his characters congratulate himself on creating no heroes, no martyrs, no Christs. Albee creates all three. For, deprived of God, man is of necessity his own salvation. Following his sanctification of Jerry in the zoo story, it is not too fanciful, I believe, to note the consistency with which George, the man who is finally responsible for the destruction of illusion, is associated with Christ, because he is showing the truth. The first line of the play, which heralds George's entrance, is Jesus, while the act ends with the same apparent identification. Martha leaves George alone on stage with the same contemptuous expletive, Jesus. This identification is repeated in the third act when Nick throws the door open and with great rue shouts out, Christ. Once again, this heralds George's entrance. It is clear, however, that this play lacks the precise parallels which had brought the zoo story to the verge of allegory. Okay. So again, this is getting back into the religious motif that you've entertained in some of your analysis, but is adding one more thing for you to consider. Consider the fact that the play opens with the word Jesus, ends with the word Jesus, and when it ends with that, apparently George is also left alone on stage. And the first case of it is when George enters. Also, Nick throwing open the door and shouting out Christ shows George entering again. So there seems to be this suggestion made with George and Jesus. So how exactly is George Jesus or Jesus-like? It echoes these ideas of liberal humanism, where we have sort of like a modern, what we've got here, a modern secular morality play. Now, when we look at secular, bear with me, it means not connected with religious or spiritual matters. For example, some people say that Australian society is a secular society because we don't, in our state schools, for instance, religion is not a part of the education system, because the government is not religiously affiliated either. Yet back in the day, King Henry or whatever else, the church and the kingdom were very, very closely related. So anyway, this play echoes this idea of a secular morality. Okay, so this is morality that comes not from religion, not from God, but that comes from mankind. So it suggests that you don't necessarily need religion or God in order to understand the difference between right and wrong. You can probably observe yourself, sometimes you meet people who are not Christians, but have a really strong sense of morals. Now that would be referred to as secular morality, morality with the absence of religion. So this play echoes secular morality, but even more so when the actual characters, the human characters, take on the role of their own salvation. Because if there is no God, man is of necessity his own salvation. So George is echoed as being the one who is Jesus. Jesus is, of course, the one who delivers the truth. And George later on in the play, both through, his sacrifice, you can notice how he sacrifices his son. That would be more of a godlike role. But if you think of the triad of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, this seems to be a character that George is heralded as, because he's the one who enters the play. He's the one who gives the truth to the people, and he's the one who sacrifices his son and offers salvation. So write down this parallel with George, and also take note of the fact that the play in this sense offers a modern secular morality where man is responsible for his own salvation. Reduced to its simplest terms, New Carthage is a kind of Vanity Fair in which the worldly wise distract the pilgrim from its true path. Modern Christian, however, is not urged to forego the pleasures of the American dream in order to obtain the fruits of his virtue in a later world, but rather to enjoy the real consolation of fellow humanity in the alienated world of the present. Failure to accept the need to confront reality is not only to deprive man of dignity, but also to leave him adrift in incomprehension, in flight from the world as it really is. This is the modern hell of Albie's morality plays. The salvation of human contact is aborted by the refusal to abandon illusion. All that remains is a frustrating parody of contact in which love begets revulsion, humour begets anger, and the aspirations of the two seeking contact are disastrously out of phase. George, who is good to me, and whom I revile, who understands me, and whom I push off, who can make me laugh, and I choke it back in my throat, who tolerates, which is intolerable, who is kind, which is cruel, who understands, which is beyond comprehension. So we can see here what they're referred to as a frustrating parody, or what is a list of contradictions. Why does she revile someone who's good to her? Why does she push off someone who understands her? So notice this part of the text and this list of contradictions. And these contradictions stem from the failure to accept reality as it is. This is what leaves the person, the human being, in incomprehension, in flight, running away from the world as what it really is. So because they're running away from reality, we get these sense of contradictions. They run away from the goodness, so they create revulsion. They run away from, laughter and humour by, choking it back in their throats. So we've got a real sense of avoidance of reality, and a parallel between avoiding reality equals avoiding what's good in the world. So in this secular morality play, there's no religion in the sense that they need to make sacrifices in the present life in order to enjoy an afterlife. What the sacrifice is here is they need to sacrifice the illusions. They need to sacrifice, kidding themselves in order to enjoy the reality of their present modern world. So that's why we see these contradictions. We see all these barriers that are stopping Martha or George from enjoying love or from experiencing real humour. It's because they're avoiding the reality. So in the same way as in sort of like religion, you need to sacrifice certain vices, certain things in order to be pure for the afterlife. In this secular morality play, you need to sacrifice illusion and fakery in order to enjoy the virtues of the current world and the present.